a waitress with tears in her eyes. What would you do if you saw that, especially if the person who made her cry could end your career with one phone call? In 1959, at New York's most prestigious event, hundreds of people faced this question, and all of them gave the same answer. They did nothing, except one: Louis Armstrong. That evening at the Plaza Hotel, America's most powerful people had gathered. A charity night, raising funds for impoverished children. How ironic, wasn't it? The wealthy had gathered to help the poor, but they wouldn't speak up about an injustice being done to a young woman working among them. Louis felt a strange uneasiness during dinner. The conversations around him were empty. People talked about money, vacations, cars, but nobody really looked at each other. Nobody really listened. Then a voice rose, harsh, intoxicated, commanding. The man standing in the center of the ballroom was shouting at a young waitress. Everyone turned, everyone saw, but nobody intervened. Something broke inside Louis because in that waitress's face, Louis saw his own mother's face. May Ann Armstrong, a woman who worked in white families' homes in New Orleans, humiliated, belittled. Louis remembered when he was 7 years old, his mother came home crying one day. An employer had scolded her in front of everyone, and nobody had helped her. That day, young Louis made a promise to his mother: "Mama, when I grow up, I'll protect people like you." Now, 54 years later, Louis knew the time had come to keep that promise. Sometimes an evening starts ordinary but ends as history. February 14, 1959 was such an evening. Louis Armstrong wasn't particularly eager when he received the invitation. A charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. Rich people, expensive clothes, obligatory conversations, but the invitation was for raising funds for a children's hospital. Louis could never say no when children were involved. That evening he put on his suit, left his trumpet at home, and went to the event. The ballroom was magnificent, crystal, gold, sparkle. But Louis knew magnificent ballrooms didn't change people. Money could buy elegance, but it couldn't buy courtesy. It couldn't buy honor. It couldn't buy humanity. Louis arrived early as he usually did. Arriving early gave him the chance to see people in their real state before they switched to performance mode, before they put on their masks. That evening, as Louis entered the ballroom, he saw the waitstaff preparing. They were arranging tables, folding napkins, placing silverware. Among them was a young woman, maybe 20 years old, careful, meticulous, focused on her work. Louis looked at her and felt warmth inside because he saw that this woman was serious, hard-working, trying to earn her living for her family, for herself, just as Louis had done years ago. When the guests began arriving, the ballroom changed. Noise increased, laughter rose, champagne flowed, and the young waitress became invisible, just a function, a service tool. Louis watched this and felt unease because Louis knew that on nights like these, as intoxication increased, respect decreased. As the wealthy felt untouchable, they crossed boundaries, usually toward the most vulnerable workers. Before we continue with this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. What you're about to witness is one of the most powerful moments in Louis Armstrong's life, a story that reveals not just his talent, but his extraordinary heart. Let's discover together what really happened that February night at the Plaza Hotel. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news, books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. To understand what happened that February evening, we need to go back not just weeks, but decades. We need to understand who Louis Armstrong really was beneath the famous smile, beneath the trumpet virtuoso image. Because the man who stood up that night at the Plaza Hotel was shaped by experiences most people in that ballroom could never imagine. New Orleans, 1908. Louis Armstrong was 7 years old. His mother, May Ann Armstrong, worked as a domestic servant in white households across the city. She cleaned their floors, washed their clothes, cooked their meals, for pennies, for scraps, for whatever dignity she could hold on to at the end of each exhausting day. Louis would wait for her every evening in their tiny room in the Battlefield neighborhood. the poorest, most dangerous part of New Orleans. Sometimes Mayanne came home so tired she could barely speak. Sometimes she came home crying. And sometimes she came home with bruises that she never explained, but Louis understood. One particular evening remained burned into Louis's memory forever. Mayanne had been working for a wealthy family on St. Charles Avenue. The lady of the house was hosting a dinner party. Important guests, politicians, businessmen, society women. Mayanne was in the kitchen preparing dishes under intense pressure. Everything had to be perfect. Then during dinner service, Mayanne accidentally spilled a small amount of gravy on the white tablecloth. It was barely noticeable. Any reasonable person would have dismissed it. But the hostess stood up, walked into the kitchen, and in front of all the other servants screamed at Mayanne for 5 minutes straight, called her clumsy, worthless, lucky to have a job, threatened to fire her without pay. Mayanne stood there, head bowed, hands shaking, absorbing every cruel word. The other servants looked away. The sighing? Guests in the dining room could hear everything but continued eating, as if nothing was happening. When Mayanne came home that night, Louis saw something in his mother's eyes he'd never seen before. It wasn't just sadness. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something deeper. A piece of her spirit had been taken. Young Louis held his mother's hand and said, "Mama, one day I'm going to be somebody, and when I am, I'll make sure nobody treats people the way they treat you." Mayanne smiled through her tears and said, "Baby, you already are somebody. Don't ever forget that." That night shaped Louis Armstrong more than any music lesson ever could. Years passed. Louis found music. Music gave him a voice, an identity, a way out of poverty. By 1922, he was in Chicago, playing with King Oliver's Creole Jazz Band. He was 21 years old, talented, ambitious, and still carrying the weight of his mother's humiliation. One night at a club on the South Side, Louis witnessed something that brought all those memories rushing back. The club owner, a white man named Frank Morrison, had hired a young black singer named Dorothy. She was talented, beautiful, and trying to support her younger siblings after their parents died. Morrison took an interest in Dorothy that went beyond professional. He made advances. She politely declined. He persisted. She continued to refuse. One evening, after Dorothy turned him down again, Morrison called her to the stage during a break between sets. In front of a packed club, he made her the target of cruel jokes, questioned her judgment, suggested she was ungrateful. The audience, mostly white, laughed. The black musicians on stage looked down at their instruments. Dorothy stood there, humiliated, fighting back tears. Louis watched from the bandstand. Every fiber of his being wanted to intervene, to say something, to defend her. But fear paralyzed him. Fear of losing his job, fear of being blacklisted, fear of ending up back in New Orleans with nothing. So Louis stayed silent. He played his trumpet when called. He collected his pay at the end of the night, and he hated himself for it. Dorothy quit the next day. Louis never saw her again. But he thought about that night for years afterward, the weight of his silence, the shame of his inaction. He'd promised his mother he would protect people like her, but when the moment came, he'd frozen. Louis vowed that if he ever had another chance, if he ever had enough power and security to speak up without destroying himself, he would not stay silent again. That promise would be tested on February 14th, 1959. But before that night, there was another person whose story needs to be told. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She was 19 years old, and working as a waitress at the Plaza Hotel was supposed to be her ticket to a better life. Sarah had grown up in Harlem, the daughter of a seamstress and a taxi driver. Her parents worked constantly, but money was always tight. Sarah was the oldest of 4 children. From age 12, she'd helped her mother sew clothes late into the night. From age 15, she'd worked after-school jobs to contribute to the family. When she graduated high school in 1957, Sarah had a choice: find work immediately or try to save for college. She chose work, planning to save enough to attend classes part-time. Getting hired at the Plaza Hotel felt like a victory. The pay was better than most places in Harlem. The tips from wealthy guests could be substantial, and it was prestigious. Working at the Plaza meant something. It meant reliability, competence, ambition. Sarah took the job seriously. She arrived early, stayed late, learned quickly. Her supervisors praised her work ethic. Other waitstaff appreciated her kindness and teamwork. For 6 months, everything went well. Sarah was saving money. She'd even enrolled in 2-night classes at City College. Her dream of becoming a teacher felt within reach. Then, in early February 1959, the Plaza announced a major charity gala, February 14th, Valentine's Day, a fundraiser for St. Mary's Children's Hospital. The guest list was extraordinary: movie stars, politicians, business tycoons, socialites. The waitstaff was briefed extensively. This event had to be flawless. Every detail mattered. Guests would be scrutinizing everything. Sarah was assigned to the main ballroom, serving drinks and hors d'oeuvres during the cocktail hour before dinner. She felt nervous, but prepared. What Sarah didn't know was that among the 200 guests, there would be one man whose behavior would change her life forever. His name was William Hutchinson. William Hutchinson was 53 years old in 1959. He'd made his fortune in oil, starting with a modest inheritance from his father and building it into an empire worth over $200 million. By the standards of the time, that made him one of the wealthiest men in America. Hutchinson was known for several things. His business acumen was undeniable. He could spot profitable opportunities that others missed. He negotiated deals that seemed impossible. He built refineries, pipelines, distribution networks across the country. But Hutchinson was also known for something else: his arrogance, his belief that wealth made him superior to others, his treatment of people he considered beneath him. Employees who worked for Hutchinson's companies spoke in hushed tones about his temper, his unreasonable demands, his habit of humiliating subordinates in front of others. But because Hutchinson had money and power, because he donated to political campaigns and sat on corporate boards, people tolerated his behavior. They looked the other way. They made excuses. On the evening of February 14th, Hutchinson arrived at the Plaza Hotel already having consumed several drinks. He'd started at his private club that afternoon, celebrating a successful business deal. By the time he walked into the gala, he was well past sober judgment. The evening began normally enough. Guests mingled, champagne flowed, conversations about business, politics, and gossip filled the air. Louis Armstrong was there as an honored guest. He donated a significant sum to St. Mary's Hospital and agreed to make brief remarks during dinner. Louis moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting compliments, making small talk. But his attention kept drifting to the waitstaff. He noticed how they navigated the space with practiced invisibility, how guests barely acknowledged them, how they were simultaneously essential and ignored. He noticed Sarah particularly. She was professional, polite, efficient, but Louis also saw something in her eyes: determination, pride in her work. A seriousness that reminded him of his younger self, hustling in New Orleans, desperate to prove his worth. Around 8 in the evening, Hutchinson's behavior began deteriorating. His voice got louder, his gestures more expansive, his comments more inappropriate. He made crude jokes about women in attendance. He bragged about business conquests with exaggerated details. People around him laughed uncomfortably, not sure how to respond. Some moved away, but Hutchinson didn't notice or didn't care. Then, just before dinner was served, Hutchinson decided he wanted more champagne. He snapped his fingers loudly, a sound that cut through the conversational hum. Sarah was nearby, carrying a tray of empty glasses back to the service area. She heard the snap, turned, and saw Hutchinson gesturing impatiently at her. Sarah approached politely. "Yes, sir, how can I help you?" Hutchinson looked her up and down in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Champagne! Now!" Sarah nodded. "Of course, sir, I'll bring a glass right away." She turned to leave, but Hutchinson grabbed her arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. "Wait, you look familiar. Have you served me before?" Sarah kept her voice steady. "I don't believe so, sir. This is my first major event at the Plaza." Hutchinson smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Well, then, this is special, isn't it? Your first big night. Must be exciting for someone like you." Something in his tone made Sarah uncomfortable. "I'm grateful for the opportunity, sir. Now, let me get your champagne." She gently pulled her arm free and walked quickly toward the service area. But Hutchinson wasn't finished. He called after her, loud enough that nearby guests turned to look. "Don't rush off. I have a question for you." Sarah stopped. Every instinct told her to keep walking, but she was at work. Refusing a guest could cost her job. She turned back. "Yes, sir?" Hutchinson, enjoying the attention he was getting from onlookers, decided to make a performance of it. "You people, you work here serving us, but do you have any talents? Or is carrying trays the best you can do? The question hung in the air. Several guests looked, shocked. Others looked away. Nobody said anything. Sarah felt her face flush. "I'm here to serve, sir. That's my job." Hutchinson laughed. "That's not what I asked. I asked if you have any talent. Can you sing, dance, entertain us?" Sarah's heart was pounding. "Sir, I'm a waitress. If you'd like entertainment, the event organizers have arranged—" Hutchinson interrupted. "I'm asking you, right now, sing something. You're black, aren't you? You people are supposed to be musical. Sing us a song!" The ballroom seemed to go quiet. Over 100 people were within earshot. All of them heard Hutchinson's demand. All of them saw the expression on Sarah's face, and all of them, in that moment, had a choice, to speak up or to stay silent. Seconds passed. Sarah stood frozen. Her hands were shaking. Tears were forming in her eyes. She wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She wanted to speak, but her voice was gone. Hutchinson was waiting, a cruel smile on his face, enjoying her discomfort. Then, from across the ballroom, Louis Armstrong moved. He'd been standing near the bar, about 30 feet away, when Hutchinson first called out to Sarah. Louis had watched the interaction unfold. He'd seen Sarah's discomfort. He'd heard Hutchinson's demeaning question. And when Hutchinson demanded she sing, Louis felt something shift inside him. This was the moment he'd been waiting for since that night in Chicago when he stayed silent. The moment to keep the promise he made to his mother. The moment to be the person he'd always wanted to be. Louis walked through the crowd deliberately, not rushing, but with purpose. People noticed. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. By the time Louis reached Sarah and Hutchinson, half the ballroom was watching. Louis stopped next to Sarah. He looked at her with gentle eyes and said quietly, "Miss, you okay?" Sarah, surprised to see Louis Armstrong standing beside her, nodded slightly. "I'm fine, sir." Louis turned to Hutchinson. His expression was calm, but his eyes were steel. "Evening, Mr. Hutchinson. I'm Louis Armstrong." Hutchinson, suddenly faced with one of America's most famous entertainers, tried to regain composure. "I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are." Louis smiled, but it wasn't his stage smile. "Good. Then you'll listen. When I tell you that this young lady doesn't need to sing for you, she's working, doing her job with dignity, and that deserves respect, not mockery. Have you ever witnessed someone being humiliated in public and wished you had the courage to intervene? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters." Hutchinson's face flushed red. "This doesn't concern you, Armstrong. This is between me and the help." The word help was loaded with condescension. Louis heard it and felt anger rise, but he kept his voice level. "Actually, it does concern me, because I know what it's like to be treated as less than human. I've spent my whole life fighting that, and I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen to someone else." Hutchinson tried to laugh it off. "You're being dramatic. I was just having some fun." Louis stepped closer, not threatening, but close enough that Hutchinson had to meet his eyes. "Fun? You call humiliating a young woman in front of 100 people fun? Let me tell you what fun isn't. Fun isn't using your wealth and position to make someone feel small. Fun isn't demanding that a hardworking person debase themselves for your amusement. That's not fun, Mr. Hutchinson. That's cruelty." The ballroom was completely silent now. Everyone was watching. Hutchinson looked around, realizing he'd lost control of the situation. "Look, Armstrong, I've had a few drinks. Maybe I was out of line, but—" Louis interrupted gently but firmly. "There's no but. You were out of line. And the question now is what you're going to do about it." Hutchinson blinked. "What do you mean?" Louis's voice softened, but the intensity remained. "I mean, you have a choice. You can double down on your behavior, make excuses, blame the champagne, or you can do something different. You can apologize to this young lady, acknowledge her humanity, treat her the way you'd want your own daughter treated." The mention of daughter struck something in Hutchinson. He had 2 daughters, both in their 20s. The thought of someone treating them the way he'd just treated Sarah made him uncomfortable. Louis seemed to sense the shift. He continued, "You know what I learned growing up poor in New Orleans? I learned that dignity isn't about money or status. It's about how you treat people when you have all the power and they have none. My mother cleaned houses for people like you, rich people, powerful people, and some of them treated her with kindness, but others treated her like she was nothing, just a tool, a function. Do you know what that does to a person? To be invisible? To be seen as less than human?" Louis paused, letting the words sink in. "This young lady, Sarah, she's someone's daughter, someone's sister. She's working hard to build a life for herself. She deserves the same respect you'd want for your own family. We all do. Rich or poor, black or white. We all deserve basic human dignity." Hutchinson stood there, the champagne fog clearing slightly, seeing himself through Louis's words. Seeing Sarah not as the help, but as a young woman, with dreams, fears, and a life beyond serving him drinks. For the first time that evening, Hutchinson truly looked at Sarah. She was crying quietly now, overwhelmed by everything. But there was also something else in her expression. Gratitude. Someone had stood up for her. Someone had seen her. Louis turned to Sarah. "Miss, you don't have to stay here if you don't want to, but if you do stay, you deserve an apology." Sarah wiped her eyes and found her voice. "I need this job, sir. I can't afford to lose it." Louis nodded, understanding. Then he looked at Hutchinson expectantly. The ballroom waited. Hutchinson, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, feeling the truth of Louis's words, feeling the shame of his own behavior, made a decision. He looked at Sarah and said quietly but clearly, "I apologize. I was wrong. You didn't deserve that." It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't profound. But it was genuine. Sarah, surprised, nodded. "Thank you, sir." Louis placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You go take a break. Get some water. Come back when you're ready." Sarah looked at Louis with tears of gratitude and walked away toward the service area. After she left, Louis turned back to Hutchinson. "You know what the sad thing is? You're a powerful man. You've built an empire. But tonight, the most powerful thing you did was say, 'I'm sorry.' That took more courage than any business deal ever will." Hutchinson stared at Louis, processing everything. Then he did something unexpected. He extended his hand. "You're right, about all of it. Thank you for stopping me." Louis shook his hand. "We all need someone to stop us sometimes, to remind us who we want to be." The two men stood there for a moment, an unlikely pair united by a moment of truth. Then Hutchinson walked away, subdued and thoughtful. Louis stood alone in the center of the ballroom. Slowly, applause began, one person clapping, then another, then more. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was applauding. Not for a performance, not for music, but for courage, for compassion, for standing up. Louis didn't acknowledge the applause. He simply walked over to where Sarah had disappeared, wanting to make sure she was truly okay. He found her in a small service hallway, sitting on a chair, being comforted by another waitress. When Sarah saw Louis, she stood up quickly. "Mr. Armstrong, I don't know how to thank you." Louis smiled warmly. "No need to thank me, miss. You did nothing wrong. You were just trying to do your job. Nobody should be punished for that." Sarah wiped her eyes. "He was so powerful. I thought if I said anything, I'd lose my job. I felt so helpless." Louis understood that feeling completely. "I know. I've been there. But let me tell you something my mama taught me. Your dignity is yours. Nobody can take it unless you give it away. You kept yours tonight. You stayed professional. You stayed kind. That takes strength." Sarah managed a small smile. "I want to be a teacher someday. I'm saving money, taking night classes. This job was supposed to help me get there." Louis's eyes lit up. "A teacher? That's wonderful. The world needs good teachers." Sarah nodded. "I want to teach children that they matter, that they're valuable, no matter where they come from." Louis felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You're going to be an excellent teacher, Sarah, because you already understand the most important lesson. Everyone has worth. Everyone deserves respect." They talked for a few more minutes. Louis asked about her family, her studies, her dreams. Sarah opened up, feeling safe with this kind man who defended her when nobody else would. Before Louis returned to the gala, he did one more thing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "Sarah, I want you to have this. It's got my manager's contact information. If you ever need help with your education, a reference for teaching positions, anything, you call. Understood?" Sarah looked at the card, overwhelmed. "Mr. Armstrong, I couldn't possibly—" Louis pressed the card into her hand. "Yes, you could, and you will. Because that's what we do. We help each other. We lift each other up. Promise me you'll call if you need anything." Sarah promised. She kept that card for the rest of her life. If this story has touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this video with others. Louis Armstrong's legacy isn't just his music, it's his humanity. And that deserves to be remembered and celebrated. The rest of the gala proceeded without incident. Hutchinson stayed but remained quiet, noticeably more subdued. During dinner, Louis gave his scheduled remarks, talking about the importance of supporting children's health care. He didn't mention what had happened earlier. He didn't need to. Everyone there already knew. After the event, word spread quickly through New York's social circles, not as gossip, but as something else. A story about courage, about standing up, about treating people with dignity. Several newspapers caught wind of it and tried to interview Louis, but he politely declined. "It wasn't about me," he told one persistent reporter. "It was about doing what's right." But Sarah's life changed in unexpected ways. A few days after the gala, the Plaza Hotel's general manager called her into his office. Sarah went terrified, certain she was being fired. Instead, the manager told her that several guests from the gala had specifically requested she be assigned to future events. They'd been impressed by her professionalism under difficult circumstances. Her tips increased dramatically. Within 6 months, she'd saved enough to attend classes full-time. By 1962, Sarah graduated with the teaching degree. She got a position at a Harlem elementary school. For the next 35 years, she taught children reading, writing, and something more important. She taught them that their lives mattered, that they deserved respect, that standing up for what's right takes courage, but it's always worth it. Sarah kept Louis's business card in a frame on her classroom wall. When students asked about it, she told them the story of February 14th, 1959, the night a famous jazz musician stood up for a waitress nobody else cared about. Some of those students went on to become teachers themselves, carrying forward Sarah's lessons. As for William Hutchinson, that night marked a turning point. He didn't transform overnight into a perfect person, but he became more aware, more careful. He started treating employees differently, less as tools and more as people. Years later, in 1967, Hutchinson funded a scholarship program for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds pursuing education. He never publicly connected it to that February night, but those close to him knew. The program was called the Sarah Mitchell Scholarship. When asked why that name, Hutchinson simply said, "She taught me an important lesson." Louis Armstrong never sought recognition for what he did that night. It was just another moment in a life full of moments where he stood up for what was right. When he passed away in 1971, Sarah Mitchell attended his funeral. She was one of thousands, but she waited hours to pay her respects. When she finally reached the front, she placed a single red rose on his casket and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Today, if you walk through that old Harlem elementary school where Sarah taught, there's a plaque in the main hallway. It reads, "In honor of Sarah Mitchell, who taught us that dignity is not given, it is recognized." Inspired by the courage of Louis Armstrong, who showed us that true power is using your voice for those who cannot speak. This story reminds us that we all face moments like February 14th, 1959. Moments where we can choose silence or courage, moments where we can look away or step forward. Louis Armstrong chose courage, not because he was fearless, but because he remembered what it felt like to be powerless. Because his mother's tears had taught him that silence in the face of cruelty is complicity. Because he believed fundamentally that every human being deserves dignity. Sarah Mitchell kept that promise. She spent her life ensuring children knew their worth. And in doing so, she multiplied Louis's act of courage thousands of times over. That's how change happens. One person stands up, one person speaks out, and that courage ripples forward, touching lives in ways we can't predict or measure. Louis Armstrong didn't just give us magnificent music. He gave us a blueprint for how to be human, how to see people others ignore, how to stand up when others sit down, how to use whatever power we have to protect those who have none. On the evening of February 14th, 1959, in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by wealth and power and prestige, the most important thing that happened wasn't a donation or a speech or a business deal. It was a simple act of recognition. Louis Armstrong saw Sarah Mitchell, not as a waitress, not as the help, but as a human being deserving of respect. And in seeing her, he reminded everyone else in that room to see her too. Somewhere tonight, someone is being humiliated. Someone is being treated as less than. Someone is crying quiet tears while the powerful laugh. And somewhere, someone has the choice Louis Armstrong had, to intervene or to look away, to speak up or to stay silent, to stand with the vulnerable or to protect their own comfort. What will you choose? Because that choice, made again and again by ordinary people in ordinary moments, is how we build a world where dignity isn't a privilege for the wealthy and powerful. It's a right for everyone. That's Louis Armstrong's real legacy. Not the trumpet solos, though they were magnificent. Not the sold-out concerts, though they were legendary. But the quiet moments, the private courage, the choice to see humanity in everyone and to defend it fiercely. As the years passed and Sarah Mitchell became known as one of Harlem's most beloved teachers, people sometimes asked her what she remembered most about that famous night. She always gave the same answer. I remember his eyes. When Mr. Armstrong looked at me, I didn't feel like a waitress. I felt like somebody. And that feeling, that moment of being truly seen, it changed everything. It made me believe I could be more, do more, become the person I dreamed of being. That's the gift he gave me, not rescue, not charity, but recognition, the simple, profound acknowledgement that I mattered. And in the end, isn't that what we all want? To be seen, to be valued, to matter. Louis Armstrong gave that gift freely, generously, courageously. To Sarah Mitchell on a February night, to countless others throughout his life. And through stories like this, he gives it to us still, reminding us that the most powerful thing we can do isn't to achieve fame or accumulate wealth or gain influence. It's to see each other, really see, and to stand up when others need us. That's the Louis Armstrong nobody talks about enough. The man behind the music, the heart behind the smile, the courage behind the celebrity. That's the Louis Armstrong who walked across a ballroom floor on Valentine's Day 1959 and changed two lives forever, his own and Sarah Mitchell's, and through them, countless others. That's the legacy worth remembering, worth celebrating, worth carrying forward. Tonight, as you think about this story, ask yourself, who needs someone to see them? Who needs someone to stand up for them? Who needs someone to remind them that they matter? And then ask, could that someone be me? Because we're all capable of what Louis Armstrong did. We all have voices, platforms, moments of choice. The question is whether we'll use them, whether we'll stand up, whether we'll see. Louis Armstrong said yes. Sarah Mitchell said yes. And their yeses echoed forward through time, touching lives, changing hearts, building a world just a little bit kinder than the one before. That's not just history. That's a call, a challenge, an invitation to be the person someone needs, to stand in the gap, to speak up, to see. And in doing so, to discover that the most powerful thing we possess isn't money or status or fame. It's our shared humanity and the courage to defend it always, everywhere, for everyone. That's Louis Armstrong, that's Sarah Mitchell, and that, if we choose, can be us.